Hello, a good day to all of our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juki, and I'm the Executive Director of the ASEAN Business Club. And it is our pleasure to extend our warmest welcome to all of you for attending today's webinar, which is the second webinar of the ASEAN Business Club. The ABC Dialogue aims to bring together leaders and leading business leaders in the region to discuss key areas of business and economic cooperation. And today it is our privilege to have His Excellency, Mr. Frédéric Laplanche, Ambassador of France to Malaysia, discussing on the topic of French technologies, opportunities, and outlook for a digital ASEAN. So before we start, I'd like to thank you for sending in your questions, and we hope that we have time for Ambassador to answer them later on. But if you didn't send us your question, you're most welcome to do so by typing into the Q&A section of box during the course of this webinar. So without further ado, may I now invite Dr. Munir Majid, the President of the ASEAN Business Club, to moderate the session. Ansri?
Yes, thank you, Juki, and hello everyone, and hello, Excellency. It gives me, particular pleasure to add to Juki's words of welcome to Ambassador Laplanche, who I have known quite well in these last few years since he was ambassador since June 2017. Frédéric Laplanche has got one of the finest minds among ambassadors that I've met. And this is not talking about yesterday or 3 years ago. I've been meeting ambassadors sent to this country since my New Straits Times days, and it goes back to 1980. And I've been privileged to know Frédéric Laplanche, to sit down, talk to him, have dinner or lunch with him and discuss many issues. And if you look at his biography, you will see where he comes from, where he's headed for, what his qualifications are, what his experience is. And so we are privileged to have him with us today. And we have to thank him for being with us. And of course, as with all ambassadors, he will leave us at some point. We shall miss him, but I'm sure he will ensure this continuity in the French interest in this country and the region. The French interest in this country and the region has not always just been political or economic. And in this country, particularly, there's been a lot of social interest. There's a lot of social history of the French being here whilst the British were dancing about with the politics and the economics of the French. Were looking at our societies, our social mores, our culture, and so on. And Frédéric has been sending me some of this stuff, about French social history, the recording that has taken place. So the French are always thereabouts, but even if they're not as loud as perhaps the British are, but because of the political and economic involvement in our country. But in the region too, they've been around. Vietnam, of course, comes to mind most of all. And insofar as their companies are concerned, and companies that are involved in the digital world, in technologies are concerned, they have plenty in the region. And they have close to 800 operating in Singapore alone. In Malaysia, they're very strong in the E&E segment, and a very strong presence also in the Iskandar region, development region. And of course, they're in Vietnam and Philippines and so on. And these are big companies. We think of Airbus, but there's Dassault, there's Accor, there is Angie, there is Thales, there is this very interesting company I was reading about called Ubisoft, which is in Singapore, which does all these games and stuff. So the French are around, they're around, their companies are about, and their technologies are strong. In fact, before COVID-19 came, I was discussing a few times with Ambassador Laplanche about taking an ABC team to visit France. But COVID-19 has put paid to it. But we shall have to think about it again. Probably after he's left, but certainly to find out on the ground in France about these technologies, which Ambassador Laplanche will be talking about, and what these technologies can bring to ASEAN. So on that note, what will happen now is that Frédéric Laplanche, Ambassador, will be making a presentation up to about 20 minutes or so, and then I have a couple of questions that I'd like to take up with him, after which we'll open the floor to other questions which Juki will bring to us. Frédéric, the floor is yours. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, the ASEAN Business Club, for opening this window for me to talk about French technology and ASEAN. I'm really happy to be with you this afternoon. Technology in this world is really trapped in the middle of battle of superpowers. That's one of the big stakes. Technology also is one of the big question marks around COVID. It helped us, or still is helping us tackling COVID, but it has opened also question marks about how far we could go with it. We need technology to fight climate change and to adapt to climate change. And technology is also one of these issues which is still trapped between the North and the South, between the developed and developing world. And we need to keep this in mind. So we need tech at this point in time for prosperity and development of our societies, but we need tech also to protect our sovereignty and our democracies. We realize that if we don't master our technology, then someone else is going to take control of our societies through tech. And thirdly, we need technology to reinforce our resilience, technology for resilience, and resilient technology in the face of challenges such as COVID. To start with, I'd like to give a bit of a definition of what I will talk about. Technology, for me, and for today's presentation, is not only about startups. A lot of it is about startups, but we also have very big and well-established companies which are producing very high quality technology. Secondly, it's not only about digital, and I know that the subtitle of this session is Opportunities and Outlook for a Digital ASEAN. But digital does not work on its own. You need a real world around digital to make it happen. Look at Grab or Uber. Without cars and drivers, you don't have Grab or Uber. And so we also need to think about the technology in the cars and not only about the digital technology that puts this together in the form of an offer to the clients. It's also not only about technology in industry or services, but also agriculture. And I'll talk about this a bit because the COVID situation has suddenly made us realize a bit better that we are dependent very often on imports and that we need to feed ourselves even when we are locked down. So technology is very interesting and important for our societies at all these levels. Now let me go into the subject, which is French technology. And I will start to draw a sort of portrait of French technology as I see it at this point, where it comes from. Then I will try to give you a few hints of concrete examples of technology that could be useful or more useful in the ASEAN region. And then I'll try to end up with suggestions of what we could do together, France and Southeast Asia, in order to spur the cooperation and the win-win situation or relationship in terms of technology. So first, I'll start with a short portrait of French technology. Thank you for your very nice words, Tansri, about what is happening in France and about our big companies, not to talk about the nice words you said about me, which made me blush. Right, France, if we go back to history, and I know I won't be long because I would put everybody to sleep at this point in time, but if we go back to history, France is a country which invented aspirin, antibiotics, bicycle, helicopter, photography, and automotive. I'm talking about 19th century and early 20th century here, but there is a sort of tradition in my country for innovation in these areas. Now, France, at this point of our history, is a country of 67 million, which is not very big, but it's the 7th largest economy in the world. So a country which is big enough to have its own independence in these areas, but not big enough to try and have an agenda of controlling others, by the way, and not big enough not to think that the European Union is not important. We are a very big part of this union, and we think also that we will manage to grow and to gain more independence and better technologies in the European Union framework. Think about the 5G, which is one of the big stakes. Actually, the 5G in the world is controlled, this technology, by a handful of companies. Among these companies, no French company, but 2 European companies. One of them, by the way, Nokia, has a 4,000 strong research center in France. So that is one of the areas where we can gain more independence, working together with our European friends. But going back to France, 7th largest economy in the world, and it offers to the development of technology a very good ecosystem, which is made of high level of education and high level of scientific research. We are the 5th or 6th largest producer of scientific results in the world. The 8th in terms of number of researchers, even though we only have 60 million people. We have 500,000 research jobs in my country, 60% of which are in industry, not in the public sector, but in private companies. And we also have 1 million engineers. They are the link between the research and the actual application industry. 1 million engineers, and we train 50,000 new engineers per year. So we've got a very deep and complete ecosystem. The result of this is that France indeed is one of the leading countries for technology and innovation. And this shows now in the statistics quite clearly, because over the past 3 years, we have become the largest recipient in Europe of foreign direct investment in the research and development area. Foreign investors choose France as a place to open their R&D centers. We have a very strong growth in venture capital funding, and if we look at startups and their results, we used to have 3 unicorns in 2018, and we have 9 in 2020. A unicorn, for those who don't know, is a company which has reached in a few years a valuation on the capital market of $1 billion. So what is behind all this? I'm going to show you a few slides to illustrate. I hope everybody can see the slides. Now, then there we go. La French Tech. That's the little pen, a little cock, which is the French national emblem, and which serves now as the emblem of the French tech. Yeah, behind this success in tech and startups, there's a very strong policy, which is probably one of the best crafted in Europe. We've got a very open policy for tech visas, which means that we are importing talents as much as we can from the rest of the world. Why not? And this is something that a lot of countries in Southeast Asia are doing as well, quite successfully. We have very short period of time between the moment you create your company and the moment it is established. You only need 4 days to establish a full company in France. And among the very important things that we have is a deduction of R&D expenses on tax returns. So this 30% tax exemption is probably the world's best tax credit system for R&D. All this being said, we have therefore a number, quite large number of companies. I would like to make a little introduction to these companies. Here, you've got the cloud of the CAC 40. These are the very big companies, the 40 biggest companies on the French capital market, on the Paris stock exchange. a lot of them are actually very high-tech companies. If you take, for example, ST Microelectronics, it is a company which produces microchips for a whole range of usage, and which has two implantations in Malaysia and in Singapore, with thousands of employees here making microchips. If you take Gemalto, that's not a very well-known name to the general public, but it's a company which has essentially, at the end of the 1970s, invented the use of microchips on cards. So all your banking cards and all your SIM cards come from this technology. And it's only 2 out of the 40. I'm not going to give you the all 40, but we have used this model of 40 largest companies to choose among the best startups in the tech area. And we have now Next 40, which is the list of French tech companies, startups, which are going to be the next 40 biggest companies in France. Here, that's a very strong concentrate of technology, from fintech to medical service to insect production, which is not digital, but which is absolutely linked to the independence in food production. That's the list, as you can see it, of the next 40. And these companies, the French government is helping them to grow even more. And behind this, we have a list of 120 biggest, among which the 40, which have access to a specific program from the French government, which includes a lot of funding. Now, I understand that that's too much to absorb, and you will soon need big data analytics to understand what I'm talking about. But I want to impress the idea that the startup scene in France is extremely active, has a lot of companies involved, and also has a lot of French government investment behind this. Now, I want to share with you a few concrete examples of French technology that could be useful in ASEAN. And it's going to be very wide-ranging, and that's meant to be also a bit making your head spin. Sigfox is one. Sigfox is a company which has a technology for Internet of Things, IoT networks. It is a company which has 70 countries already covered, company which was established in 2010. So in 10 years, it covers now 1 billion people across the globe with a ready-to-use IoT network. This is the Southeast Asia part of this coverage map. You see that a number of countries are there. Indonesia is the last one, addition in February 2020, with the IoT network of Sigfox, which is already in place. But a few companies in Southeast, a few countries in Southeast Asia are still not there, and therefore are the next goal for expansion here. Having an IoT network provided by Sigfox guarantees that your country will be able to move to Industry 4.0, guarantees that your country will be able to use, and your companies will be able to use these little microchips in objects around, to control them, to make sure that they're not stolen, to know where they are, to connect to sensors in your fields and in your storage facilities. It's extremely wide-ranging, and this is one of the French technology which is really enabling for the countries in which it is deployed. We started the Sigfox network in Malaysia, for example, 2 years ago only, but it's fully operational now and in use. Let me continue, because we're talking about digital and data. We talked about aerospace or aeronautics. You know that France, Airbus, produces half of the planes that fly in the world. But France is also mastering one of the technologies which is essential for communication and telecommunication, which is satellite making, crafting, designing, and satellite launching. And here you've got these three companies. Airbus and Thales are actually building satellites, and Arianespace is launching them. All these are French companies which are available to service the rest of the world, including ASEAN. Let's move to energy and renewable energy. Ciel et Terre, Sky and Earth in French, has also a company which was established in 2010, this one, very recent one, and it is a specialized in floating solar panels and solar electricity production facilities. Here you see the very first pilot project in France 10 years ago. Here you see a project in Cambodia, the first floating PV plant in Cambodia, and probably in Southeast Asia to my knowledge. And here you see a huge solar floating plant in Anhui in China, which is 70,000 kilowatt peak, the world's largest floating solar panel. This is a French technology put to the service of renewable energies and placed on artificial lakes. Now I move to transportation. Transportation is also full-fledged French master technology. Alstom is one of our major companies. It's been established a long time ago, but it provides city transportation, which is not very much deployed in ASEAN and which is really interesting. In particular, for example, these tramways, which the technology of which is very difficult to control because you've got to mix them with ordinary traffic, but they become extremely useful, and these tramways in French cities are well loved by the people. Alstom also produces trains, and in trains you have a lot of new additions: artificial intelligence, automatic self-driving trains, hydrogen power trains. All these technologies are developed and at the moment tested or already being deployed. And finally, of course, Alstom is also a producer of high-speed rail, and I have a lot of hopes for high-speed rail in Southeast Asia. I think that's one of the areas where Southeast Asia will move in the future. The latest high-speed rail built by Alstom in the world, after other examples in the past in South Korea, for example, is Morocco, completed in 2018. Airbus of the battery is the next. We are building a very big company which will provide batteries for cars in the next few years, whereas at the moment it is essentially an Asian controlled market and a Chinese controlled market very much. So we want our independence on this, and we built a specific purpose company to become independent on this. Two final points on medical and on agriculture, because these are very much linked to the situation of COVID. We need more, and we've got a range of technologies here which are quite interesting. This is a teleconsultation cabin. You've got all the material to make a consultation, but the doctor is miles away. And this is a new concept that has just been developed by a small startup in France. Quite interesting in the current situation to cater for remote areas. This is a protection fabric that kills germs in a very short period of time. So once you put this on a handrail, you will get rid of COVID germs. And among the very big companies which are working at the moment on finding a vaccine, we have 3 in France. So we've got 3 vaccine projects in France. One is Sanofi, one is Institut Pasteur, which is a very big one. The first 2 are very big ones. And a small company, Valneva, who is also having now quite almost ready to manufacture vaccine for COVID-19. Finally, agriculture. I'm too long, and it's a lot of data here. But you can see here that the number of startups in agri-tech in France is huge in a large number of areas. I just picked 2. One is making robots for weeding, and one is making feed out of insects, feed for fish. And this particular company, Entofood, is actually developing its pilot project here in Malaysia, together with huge utilities company Veolia. Palm Elite is another one, which is making oil palm seeds, and they are producing, it's a French company based on the French technology of a large laboratory, CIRAD, and which is producing its oil palm seeds in Thailand. Now, what is the way forward for us? What can we do out of all this? my feeling is that, first of all, have a look at what we are already doing. We have established in 6 countries of Southeast Asia what we call French tech communities. These are gatherings, networks for small and upcoming startups from France and from the country where they are implanted, together with the larger technology companies and together with the local and French government agencies. So you can see that we have French tech communities in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, in the Philippines, and in Singapore. Now, that's one way of doing things together. But we have also research cooperation. And for this, we have established co-funding mechanisms for research with a number of ASEAN countries. That includes Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. We also have the French Development Agency, AFD, which is providing funding in the form of development assistance to a large number of ASEAN countries, 7 out of 10, to develop research cooperation. We also want to work on talents. There are not enough young people from the ASEAN countries which go to France for study, whether we're talking about science or engineering. We have programs, for example, in Malaysia, which are well established now, sending about 200 students each year to engineering schools in France, but that's not enough. And in particular, at ASEAN level, we can do much, much more. Now, apart from sending young people from Southeast Asia to France for studies, we can also bring our universities and our engineering schools here to the region. We don't have a lot of examples. We have a few examples in Vietnam, where we have several instances of cooperation on engineering and science university. And we've got a very new example and very innovative one here in Malaysia, which is École 42. École 42 was started 7 years ago in Paris. It's a computer coding school. So here we're talking about the heart of development of the digital economy in our countries. Computer coding school, which has 0 tuition fee. It's free for all students. It has no teachers. It works on the principle of co-education and cooperation, collaboration between the students. It has no classes, everything is online. And it has no requirement for people to join. You don't need to have any prior diploma or graduation. You only need to be 18 years old. This model, which was started in France 7 years ago and which is really very efficient nowadays, has just been expanded to Malaysia, where now it's working out of Sunway University. We are going to have the first recruitment for École 42 at Sunway Education Group in November this year. Recruitment is open, by the way. If anybody is interested, you only need to be 18 years old, and then you go through the selection process, which is drastic and very difficult. Now, what else can we do together? I think we can exchange on policies between government of France and ASEAN. I think that's one of the areas where probably we can do much more. We have exchanges with governments of like Singapore, but not many with the rest of ASEAN. And I think that's one of the areas where we can do more. So finally, what are my advice to you listening to this presentation? If you want to find the right French technology for you, first of all, go ask the Business France office or French Chamber of Commerce near you. Remember that we have a French embassy in all ASEAN countries without exception. So you can always go to the French embassy and the Business France office or French Chamber of Commerce to look for what you need in terms of French technology. Second, join the French tech community nearest to you. There are 6 of them, as I've said before. If you qualify, because the membership is based on the peer decision, so you've got to convince that you have the level to join this French tech community. Third, you can follow La French Tech to know what is happening in France in the field of, in particular, startups. You can follow the monthly newsletter French Tech Trends ASEAN, which we publish every month out of Singapore. And you can contact the person in charge of French Tech in Singapore, who works for the whole ASEAN, and of which I put the contacts here. What I hope to finish with is that we can develop a bit more what we are doing at the moment in terms of cooperation between France and ASEAN on technology. We're very open to technology cooperation and technology transfers as well. That's one of the characteristics of France in this particular area. We are ambitious to become an ASEAN development partner in the years to come. We have just, by the way, appointed a special envoy of the French foreign minister for economic relations with ASEAN. François Corbin is a businessman. He comes from the Michelin Group, and he will be the person who will want to develop economic cooperation all across the board, including on technology. This being said, thank you for your attention, and I give the floor back to you, Tan Sri. We can't hear you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And that was actually a powerful presentation of the extent and depth of French technology. I mean, if one looks at what you've said, it covers all the four areas normally associated with the complementary technologies. You know, you cover digital, you've covered biotechnology, the advanced materials technology, and of course, very strongly in energy and environment, which you actually have also emphasized. There's not just a powerful presentation, it was hugely informative in terms of the companies that are involved, the startups that are starting up, already established, and of course, in terms of the way forward, you know, how we should be engaging the French, given this foundational strength in technologies that the France already has. And it wouldn't do much justice to begin by asking, say, a couple of questions which seem quite narrow, you know, in perspective against that huge presentation, that powerful presentation that you've made. But I would like to start, if I may, Excellency, to ask you, since we are in these dark times of COVID-19, and but I have noted in some research I did that the French institutes, there are two French institutes that have sort of a high security virus lab sort of research, you know, that is being done, one in Shanghai and indeed one in Wuhan. So it was so interesting to see the French, you know, doing this collaboration with the Chinese on these preventive technologies. Is there any prospect of something like that happening in ASEAN as a post-pandemic or even current pandemic state that we're in?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's good to narrow a bit. I realized that my presentation was very wide and too wide probably. Yeah, the Institut Pasteur Institute, which we have in Shanghai, is also present in Southeast Asia. Actually, the first Pasteur Institute opened outside of France was opened in Ho Chi Minh Ville, was called Saigon at the time, in 1891. So it's a very, very long-standing presence. And we have three Institut Pasteur in Vietnam, one in Cambodia, one in Laos. You will notice that this corresponds to the former French colonies in Southeast Asia. But outside of these countries, we have more or less institutionalized cooperation on medical science and research. If I take Malaysia as an example, and I will use a lot of examples from Malaysia by definition because I'm Ambassador of France to Malaysia, so that's the country I know best. In Malaysia, for example, we have an ongoing cooperation which is actually being applied at the moment to looking for substances to fight against COVID-19. This cooperation brings together University Malaya and a French Center for National Center for Scientific Research on the idea of looking for plants and natural substances in the Malaysian jungle, which is very well known for its biodiversity, and trying to transform this into pharmaceutical substances. At the moment, these two research centers are focused and working very hard to find the next substances that will be able to fight against COVID. So that's the type of research that we are conducting at the moment. But in developing countries of the ASEAN region, we also have a presence which is quite strong of the French Development Agency, AFD, on public health programs, for example, on dengue and leptospirosis in countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, the Philippines. So we already have in place some elements of cooperation, but definitely I would follow you on the idea that we should develop this further, because that is one of the areas where definitely we will be faced in the future with new diseases, new epidemics. And you were quite right also in your question to point out the fact that environment and climate change is also an important element and linked to the situation we have in the field of disease and sanitary situation.
Thank you very much. Just another question before we go to questions from the floor. And this question actually relates to some questions I've seen already from questions coming from the floor, one or two. I mean, one of the strong points you made was that France has the best technology development policy in Europe, I think, if not the world, you know. And this is obviously also related, obviously, to talent development, which you mentioned subsequently. Okay, there are policies, and then there's also, you know, you have the talent take advantage of those policies. But you mentioned towards the end that the exchange of information with governments not been very strong between governments. Now, would it not be in mutual interest, you know, given the strong foundational technology development policy that you have, to actually inject into ASEAN policies that foundation that would help them develop digital technologies or technology as in general? Ambassador.
I've been very immodest saying that France has the best policy in the world, maybe. The fact is we have become one of the most attractive places for foreign direct investment in this area over the past few years. So that it shows that there is some reality. However, I would say that regarding ASEAN countries, they also actually have, most of them, very strong policies which are in place and which are pretty well crafted. If I look at Singapore or Malaysia, once again, there are a lot of possibilities in place. Government agencies are there. They develop policies which are very forthcoming. And even the French entrepreneurs who come to Malaysia to set up a little startup find it possible to work with these government agencies and to find support. So we're not starting from nowhere in ASEAN. On the contrary, and I think one of the interests from our perspective, from the French perspective, to work with this region is precisely because we see the region as a very promising area of technology development. If you look at the companies, the startups in the ASEAN, the ASEAN apparently, according to what I read, has 11 unicorns already, which is quite a number. And among those, on top of those, there are 2 decacorns, which are valued more than $10 billion on the market. And these are, I think, Grab and Gojek. So this is an area where you have also a lot of research, universities which are top world class. And therefore, I'm not placing myself in the position where we would have the best policies and the best people and the best companies, and we would come here to share our better knowledge. I'm placing myself from the perspective of coming and finding really good, interesting, two-way cooperation with the ASEAN. And I think we probably need to do more and a bit better, government to government. But to be frank, I think the French communities, the French tech communities that we have established also have that as an objective, even though we don't manage them. I mean, the embassies don't manage them. They are self-managed communities made up of their members, who are usually startups or big company tech people. And it's good that they are self-managed. But the objective is also that they bring to the governments on both sides, the French and the government of the country, good ideas on how to further develop their activities.
Thank you very much. Let's quickly go to Joo Ki, who's going to bring to you some further questions, and a lot of them questions from the floor. Joo Ki, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Tan Sri, and thank you, Ambassador, for that very informative presentation. And let me share with you and read to you some of the questions that we have received. Yeah, the first set of questions or points came from Mr. Muhammad Rizwan, founder of CS Tech Solutions Group. I believe that he's also the president of the FinTech Association of Malaysia. His first point, probably it's a starting point for your thoughts. The first point is focus business verticals for collaboration, namely finance, agri-food, and medical tech. The second point is incentives available for scaling business in the form of funding, partnership, mentorship program. What are your thoughts, Ambassador?
Thank you very much. Regarding the idea of taking this subject from the vertical perspective, yeah, I actually at the beginning of my talk, I insisted on the horizontal aspect of things and the necessity to bring together different elements of technology together with the actual world, and not to forget the real world when we talk about digital. But when we want to develop cooperation across boundaries, like we're trying to do between France and ASEAN, I think it makes sense to try and bring people who a bit look alike. That's what we're trying to do. We have a program called French Tech Tour ASEAN, by which over the past 3 years, it's only 3 years old, we bring to ASEAN, to 2 or 3 countries, French startups working in different sectors, and we organize for each of them contacts with their counterparts in the countries we bring. So we use that sort of business vertical approach to developing these contacts as well. Regarding the question of scaling, I entirely agree with the idea that this is fundamental to develop the technology sectors. I remember a few years ago, to 2015, going to New York on an official visit with my Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, and meeting with the French tech community in New York, which is a huge thing, a lot of members, hundreds of members. And the story they would tell us 5 years ago was, you know, French people going to New York to establish their companies. The question we asked was, why? Why didn't you do that back home? Wouldn't that be easier? And the answer was funding. New York at the time provided funding for these young French entrepreneurs who had ideas, but could, with difficulty, find the seed funding and the scale-up funding that they needed. In France, I think we took the lesson out of these, and at this point in time, we have a lot of opportunities for funding, and which mean that these guys do not have to expatriate. At the same time, it's never bad that people go around and do something somewhere else, and I'm very happy to have 30 or 40 French entrepreneurs in Malaysia who are starting from scratch and building their company and looking for funding here and having difficulty finding funding in Malaysia. So I think that really for the countries of Southeast Asia, just like for us, the lesson we have to learn is to be able at government level, but also within the banking systems, to take care of these startups and small entrepreneurs and be able to accompany them into growth. If not, they're going to move and they'll go somewhere else.
Sure. Thank you. The next question comes from Professor Dr. Abu Bakar Abdul Majid, Professor and Rector of University Technology Mara. His question is, Your Excellency, could you please highlight examples of collaborations and opportunities for institutions of higher education?
Right, plenty of it, plenty of examples. And if I look at Malaysia once again, we've got about 60 to 70 programs of cooperation between universities in France and Malaysia. These programs of cooperation include both exchange of students, and we need that. It's very important both ways to have the possibility to have Malaysian students going to France, for example, for double degrees or to follow a full course in engineering, for example, and also French students coming to Malaysia for short term. And this is extremely useful. In the tech sector, we have some of that. So education and exchange of students is one, and cooperation and scientific research is the other, which we realize now has developed very strongly in Malaysia, much more than we thought. We had 2 years ago the first convention of France-Malaysia scientific cooperation, and we had 150 people taking part, half of them coming from Paris specifically, or from the rest of France, by the way, specifically to participate in this. And we have launched last year, for the first time, a program to co-fund Government of France and Government of Malaysia, co-funding of cooperation between research centers in the two countries. And to our big surprise, whereas we have the possibility to fund 10 projects, we have had 2 years in a row more than 80 candidates, meaning 80 partnerships already established between a French and a Malaysian research center or university bidding for support from the two governments in this field. So I would definitely encourage people to make use of this. This type of partnership is not only available in Malaysia, but also in 5 other ASEAN countries. And if there's no partnership, there would be other opportunities for funding for both exchange of students and research cooperation.
Right, so it's a very active space already. So it's just about getting themselves connected with the right parties to find out more. All right, next question comes from InvestKL from Jessica Choi. What are the pain points of French tech companies when they set their footprint in ASEAN?
Pain points. Oh, it's a difficult question. Who likes to talk about pain? But I think I will go back to one thing, but two elements. One is talents and the possibility to go back and forth. I'm not talking about that particular moment of COVID, which by definition is very specific, and the constraints to international travel are perfectly needed at this point in time. But in general, are the countries of Southeast Asia open to having young entrepreneurs from abroad, from France, for example, come and have a status and have a resident status enough to be able to build their business? You will find that the countries who have this type of visa possibility of programs are the most successful in attracting foreign talents. So if you're too shy, if your country is too shy about this, if the borders are not so open, then you will lose out on opportunities of attracting these talents. That's one. The second, and the only other pain point, would be financing, funding, the point I just made before. If in this particular country, funding is not available to foreigners, for example, which is the case in Malaysia, some elements of funding for SME are just not possible and they're not available to foreigners. Then once again, it's the economy of this particular country which is going to lose out and not offering the possibility for these companies coming from outside to grow and develop locally. So these would be, it's not pain points, but it's sort of suggestion of public policy.
Challenges.
Yeah, to spur the growth in these sectors.
Sure. I think these two are commonly shared. These two areas of challenges are commonly shared among the different sectors and different countries as well. Okay, thank you. And the next question, or next set of questions, come from Dato Lim Hong Teng from 100X Sdn Bhd. The question are, will the French authorities continue to support and nurture adoption of digital assets, such as cryptocurrencies and security tokens in their local jurisdiction? And secondly, what are the chances of Europe issuing its own euro-backed digital cryptocurrency?
Very good question. Very tough question at the same time. Cryptocurrencies are, it's a difficult area. We have a policy. I mean, the French government policy is to support and promote the development of cryptocurrencies in our country. We are bullish on cryptocurrencies is the sort of motto. However, I think we're quite also bullish on regulation of this sector. Which we think is quite important to making sure that we don't go into the world with risk elements which would be too high. However, the technologies of cryptocurrencies, including blockchains, are fully developed at the moment. Some of the very big French startups actually work on this subject with some quite good levels of support from government and success in their business. So yeah, on the European side of things, I think we're still working on it. There's nothing at this point in time which is concrete in terms of developing a sort of crypto currency at the EU level. Although I must say that Tan Sri Munir is much better placed to answer these questions on financial issues. But I would say that a cryptocurrency which is actually developed by a government or a central bank is not so much a cryptocurrency as the currency. That's my personal vision.
Well, I guess the key is risk management, so that to ensure that we're not exposed too much to the unknown uncertainty, I suppose. Yeah, and if I may. Yeah, so if I may move on to the next question, this comes from Claire Lim of University of Cambridge. What do you see as the biggest aspect of economic cooperation which will happen in the next 5 years between ASEAN and France?
We have an economic cooperation which is still a bit too narrow. If you look at the flux of import and export, you will see that this is quite concentrated on a small number of items. And I think in the next 5 years, the challenge and the objective for us is to try and stick a bit better in the shape of our bilateral trade, to stick a bit better to the challenges that we are facing at world level, France, European Union, and ASEAN included. And here I go back to the ideas in introduction, which I presented in link with what we are at the moment seeing in the world, to keep our economic sovereignty and therefore to be able to exchange technology and products that allow this to all our countries, to be resilient, to have our food security well prepared. And ASEAN, from this perspective, I think realizes that it's an area which is quite weak and quite at risk. A lot of countries are relying a lot on imports. And even though France is one of the largest food and agriculture exporter in the world, and our interest is that this area continues to rely on imports because we will export. Our interest, generally speaking, is also to contribute and cooperate in developing the agriculture sector in these areas. So look at climate change. It's one of the other challenges. So behind the question of climate change will be energy, waste management, transport systems, public and private transport. So all these issues are the big trends which are going, I hope, and we will work on this to shape the future of our economic relations in the next 5 years.
Sure. And if I may just, I know if we're on the dot 4 p.m., but if I can just ask a final question. What can you say about the digital divide today compared to the past? And this question comes from, I hope I read the name correctly, Luila Marie Zarchila, CEO of LZ Cybersecurity and Technologies Corporation.
question which is very much to the point. The COVID has shown us that there are two elements going in different direction. One is the digital divide over the years has decreased because the digital literacy and the accessibility to the computer, the mobile phone, has increased over the years, and it's a small part of our population which has no access to this anymore. At the same time, the impact of digital illiteracy has grown very significantly. During COVID, if you don't have a computer, if you don't have a mobile phone, or if you don't know how to use them, then you're more lost in the society than before. So it's, I think, even more important than it was 10 years ago to try and bridge this gap and make sure that everybody is on board from the point of view of understanding the digital world and having access to the hardware which is necessary for it. That's a top priority for our government.
Sure. So it's exposed the gaps and the weaknesses of the digital divide. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Tan Sri, and thank you, Ambassador, for answering those questions.
Thank you, Juki.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, one more time. I think you ended where you started. I think you started by emphasizing sustainability and climate change. You started by emphasizing sovereignty, economic sovereignty. You started by emphasizing that technology is not just digital, it's also agriculture. And so you ended really on the point that it is a solution for all. You know, it's a global solution. It's not sort of a limited, narrow solution. The only comment one might make is, insofar as economic sovereignty is concerned, it might be in our joint geo-economic interest, the region and EU, not just France, to have a free trade agreement, region to region, you know, to strengthen the foundations of the relationship and the foundations of regionalism in the world today. But what you have offered us today, you've shown us today very clearly, there's a lot of capability out there insofar as French technology is concerned. And then you have also showed us there's a lot of things that are available out there. You've got to go and search, and you've given us, you know, what is available and how you can reach it. You have, of course, also underlined on certain shortcomings, especially in terms of funding and in terms of openness to foreign talent to use funds in the country in situ, and therefore, you know, to develop. I suppose Singapore does this best in Southeast Asia. But you know, you have covered a heck of a lot in just over an hour, and I think we all are indebted to you for spending so much time with us and sharing your thoughts. Can I, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much indeed, Frédéric. Thank you, and all the very best. And we'll catch up again before you leave, I hope. Okay, goodbye, everyone, on that note, and thank you once again, Excellency.
Thank you very much.
So I guess I just would like to say thank you very much, Ambassador, and we would like to also thank all our participants for spending the past hour with us, and we hope to see everyone again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.